Welcome back to Sportz Blitz Live, presented by JR Sports Bar and Grill and S&S Discount Tire. This segment brought you away by Mike Bradberry at Bradberry Medical Center. That means we're in the Bama Blitz segment of the show. I want to welcome in Luke Robinson. And, Luke, we want to thank Mike Bradberry for all he does for the program.
Yeah, Mike Bradberry, of course, has been a sponsor of this segment for quite some time. Certainly do appreciate everything he does.
Don't know why, if you're a Bama fan, you'd want to not sponsor this segment, especially saying you probably have to pry Mike out of this spot if somebody wanted to come and counteroffer to come be the sponsor of this. It's been a great ride for Alabama, especially on the football side. But and we'll start there, Luke. Recruiting Nick Saban, again on the road, had some in-home visits last couple of days. He was down at the Senior Bowl practice this weekend, still staying after it. I know there's getting limited in space as far as who Alabama can sign or can get commitments from, but who are some of the top targets out there that the Alabama fans or Nick Saban would like to bring in to make this class complete?
Well, the first one is one that Auburn fans are certainly familiar with, and D-liner. I think Nick Saban is going to visit D-liner tomorrow. So, we've known it for quite some time, or at least believed it, that we think D-liner will switch to Alabama eventually. Von Bell is another guy who's a five-star safety out of Georgia that's down to basically Alabama, Ohio State, and Tennessee. I really think he's down to Ohio State and Alabama. And in the end, I think he ends up at Alabama. Alvin Kamara is a running back. I can't believe they're recruiting another running back. But I think this guy is so electric. I've seen him in some of the All-Star games. I've seen him in the playoffs on TV in the Georgia State playoffs. And, the guy's just, the kind of kid you want on the field in some capacity. The same way Florida used Percy Harvin. I'm not saying this guy is as good as Percy Harvin. I'm just saying the same way that they used him. And I think that if you can get a guy that's electric in the return game or very good that can help you at running back or in the slot or in some capacity like that, I think that you take him and it could end up where Alabama has 4 running backs in the rivals' top 100. That is crazy to think about. But let me tell you this. I feel quite certain that after Lattimore's injury at South Carolina this year, that if I'm a running back, I look at it like, it's great to be a school's all-time leading rusher, and that's fantastic. And, it'd be great to have a statue like Bo Jackson or be, known as maybe the best college running back ever like Herschel Walker. But you know what? In the end, if I get fewer carries but still look good and get drafted in the top 5, top 10, or just in the first round and still make a bunch of money when it's all said and done, that may be the way to go. Have some longevity in your career instead of being run like a plow mule. Like, Lattimore was their running back. That was it. If you can be a guy who gets more carries and has more longevity because you don't run the ball quite as much, that may be a good thing. And then finally, a kid like Eddie Jackson, who's a defensive back, a fast riser out of Florida. This kid's sort of one of those guys that you don't talk about at the beginning of the year as being very highly rated, but he has one of those crazy senior years. He hits a little bit of a growth spurt, and he gets his name out there. And Florida State really wants him, but Alabama's come on the scene, and I think Alabama's going to end up getting him too. The guys I think Alabama will miss on, I think Alabama will miss on Reuben Foster. Austin debates me on that, but I think Alabama, again, may be the best place for him. But I think in the end, he's the kind of kid that's going to be, really swayed by his last visit, and Auburn's going to be his last visit. Those are a lot of the guys that are still left on the board. There are a couple of more out there, but in the end, I think those ones that I mentioned are who Alabama ends up with.
Well, Alabama already number one in a lot of recruiting services again, and again, the cupboard's full. I think at this point in time, with the guys that you just mentioned and able to pick those up, it'll be. They'll still end up in the top, no question about it. Luke, let's shift gears and talk about some basketball. And Alabama basketball looks like they might be picking it up a little bit here, right as we were just starting last week to kind of write them off. Looks like they may have turned the corner toward a little bit of an upswing.
Well, yeah, and it could be very short-lived. They played Kentucky tonight, and of course, Kentucky. I heard you and Andy talk about how Kentucky absolutely routed Auburn, and Brett, that's why we don't do work like Chicago Bob. Because you and I both picked Auburn to beat Kentucky, and it turns out Auburn was never in the game, and they looked like the Auburn of old, and Kentucky looked like Kentucky of last year. So, is Alabama good enough to hang with this team? Quite frankly, I don't know. Alabama's done some good things here recently, And, I mean, I think they've won 3 in a row and 4 out of the last 5. But, you know, I mean, against Texas A&M, they had 3 points. They scored the first 3 points of the game, the first bucket of the game, early in the game. And then they didn't score again until, like, maybe 9 minutes to go in the first half. I mean, it was crazy and horrible and disgusting all at the same time. And so I don't know. I mean, this team did find a way to win. I'll give them credit. But, I mean, I'm going to give them a lot more credit if they beat Kentucky tonight. I was absolutely shocked that the line only came out at Kentucky -4. I really thought Kentucky would be an 8 or 9 point favorite. So maybe Vegas knows something I don't. But I think Kentucky's probably going to win tonight. But, you know, again, Alabama seems to find a way to win right now. And if they win this game, I mean, it's Katie bar the door because they've got some very winnable games coming up in a row.
Well, maybe if they'll go better than 0 for 15 from outside the three-point line, they'll have a chance to win because Auburn was abysmal out there. Luke, I was talking to some people during the game, and with 4 minutes to go, Auburn had 15 points against Kentucky, and somebody told me, said, Alabama only scored 15 points in the first half against Texas A&M, but the only difference was Alabama was able to win and pull that off.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, look, Alabama and Auburn, I mean, we can, you know, just last week we were talking about how Auburn seems to have turned a corner and Alabama's fallen in the ditch. And meanwhile, you know, now a week later, that's just life in college basketball. You can have 2 pretty bad losses and, you know, that's what happens. And Auburn is still, I think Auburn is what their record says they are, which is a 500 or maybe a little worse team. And the same goes for Alabama. We've seen enough of a sample size to see what these teams are. Alabama's going to be, you know, about you know, they're going to be a 12-6-ish kind of team all year long. And Auburn's going to be 8-8, 8-9 type team all year long. That's what's going to happen. Every now and again, Auburn's going to mess around and beat a team they shouldn't. But for the most part, they're going to be what they've been, and I don't see any reason to think any different.
Alabama and Auburn let another good one get out of the state today. Randy opened it up and talked about De'Runnya Wilson chooses Mississippi State, and again, it just absolutely amazes me that Anthony Grant and Tony Barbie allow that to continue. I know Anthony Grant's done a better job over the last 2 or 3 years than Tony Barbie of getting in-state players to stay, but this is 2 years in a row. Looks like Mr. Basketball in the state, and I'll be shocked if De'Runnya Wilson doesn't win that. Goes over to Starkville to play for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, you know, you're absolutely right. But now let me clarify. If my understanding is he committed to play football for Mississippi State. Now, he may play basketball as well, but I think that he is committed to play football.
It's both. It's both, Luke.
Okay, it is both, but he will sign a football scholarship, and so he will technically be a football player. Which is, you know, look, if Mississippi State can get him on the court in any capacity, I think it's a good thing. You know, look, Alabama, for whatever reason, didn't make him a priority on the basketball court. I fault Alabama for that. I don't necessarily fault Alabama for not making him a priority on the football side. I do kind of fault Auburn in that capacity. I think this is a kid that, I mean, you know, we've seen how athletic he is. I haven't seen a lot of his football stuff, but, you know, he looks like the kind of kid that, you know, when he's a sophomore, everybody's going to wish they had taken a chance on him in football. Basketball-wise, I think the thing about him, he may be Mr. Basketball this year, and I think he's a wonderful player, and I would have definitely given him a scholarship if I'm Anthony Grant. Having said that, I think he's got a pretty low ceiling. I don't think he's got the kind of necessarily the skills to be a superstar at the next level. I think he's got the chance to be a solid contributor, but not necessarily a superstar. So for me personally, I think it'd be better to take a chance on his being a 6'6", 200-pound superstar wide receiver rather than a 6'6", 200-pound, you know, pretty good forward or tweener in basketball. But, you know, I certainly would have wasted a scholarship on him, Brett. I mean, Alabama's got depth problems. Auburn's got roster problems. I mean, I find it very puzzling that neither school, you know, thought it worth at least giving him a shot in that capacity.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's funny, Brett, I want to say one other thing, and I know it's time for me to wrap up, but I was listening to you and Andy talk, and it's funny, like a week ago, everybody's killing, and I'm not saying you two guys, but everybody's killing D-liner and what does a commitment mean anymore. And then the first thing Andy opens up with is, Auburn gets a guy to swap from Arkansas, and then gets another guy to swap from Texas A&M. And the funny thing about the guy who swapped from Texas A&M, he committed to Florida State, decommitted, committed to Florida State again, decommitted, committed to Texas A&M on national TV, and now he's committed to Auburn. And, look, it's the name of the game. So anybody who got upset about D-line, or anybody who gets upset from Alabama about Reuben Foster, look, man, it's the way it's going to be. We can't drill it into these kids' heads. It's not a commitment anymore, and everybody ought to deal with it.
Yeah, it's a flip-flop fest, and I think the deal with D-liner, though, with us is what we talked about last week. I just think you and I knew from day one. Sometimes you can tell and we're more privy to the Alabama kids than we are anybody else, that some things aren't as – you can look and see they're not genuine. And you can see in their tone of voice and how they handle it and the games they play and the kidding around and stuff that I don't know Tony Stevens. I don't know all the flipping and how he handled himself because he's from Florida. So I don't really know. I'm sure Florida people feel that way, or Florida State fans. But you and I could read it in D-liner, and now Auburn's not even in the mix. And we all know he's going to end up at Alabama, and that's fine. It's his choice, and that's what kids need to do. They need to make a choice. What I was arguing about last week is that I don't like the games they play with these schools. These schools are giving opportunities to them, and I know that schools pull offers sometimes, but for the most part, they look at this as like it's some kind of a game, and that's the part I don't like.
No, and look, I agree with you. I wish that it wasn't that way. I would love for it not to be that way, but it is that way, and if you don't play the game, you're going to get left in the dust. That's the only catch.
Good point, Luke. We appreciate it, my man, and look forward to seeing how Alabama fares against Kentucky tonight.
It's about to tip off right now, so get your popcorn ready.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Luke. Appreciate it. That's Luke Robinson with the Bama Blitz. Mike Bradberry at Bradberry Medical Center, the sponsor, the longtime sponsor of that. We want to thank him for being part of the program. When we come back, we'll have a special guest, Jason Caldwell from Inside the Auburn Tigers, Scout.com, to talk about recruiting in general. Of course, he'll give some insight into some of the recruits that Auburn is still looking at and some of the chances of landing some of those guys, but recruiting as a whole across the country. Stay tuned. More Sportz Blitz Live presented by JR's and SNS Tire right after this.